Thank you so much for coming to our Climate Change and Renewable Energy Week program today. This is our last webinar of the week, and we've had a pretty great time and learned quite a bit. Most of the webinars are published on YouTube as well. And I just want to thank the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund and the Green Investment Fund of Mount Allison Students Union for helping support New Brunswick's first Climate and Renewable Energy Week. So without further ado, I'm Julia Feltham, the Energy Projects Coordinator for EOS Eco-Energy. And some of your faces will be recorded over the course of the call. So if you don't want that to be shown, feel free to turn off your cameras. And also, I will happily answer any questions in the chat whenever I get a chance or a break in conversation. And we have three illustrious panelists with us today. And I believe all of us, my office, as well as the three people who are solar powered, all live on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Mi'kmaq. So I just want to acknowledge that we are on the lands and waters of the Mi'kmaq people as well. So without further ado, I might just ask the three panelists, Eric Tusz-King, Roland Chaisson, and Barb Clayton, to all introduce themselves, if that's all right. Maybe starting with you, Barb. I haven't heard from you today. You're muted though.
Yeah, sorry. I was in another meeting that just ended, so sorry about that. Yeah, so I'm Barb Clayton. I'm a resident of Sackville and a beneficiary of the Beausejour Renewable Energy Co-op's program to lend money to homeowners like me to get solar panels. So I'm not a numbers person. So I really don't have a lot of data on it, but I can give the perspective of somebody who went through a program to get solar. So I have 12 solar panels on my home and very happy with them. And yeah, so that's why I'm here. I'm also on the EOS board, just as full disclosure. So maybe over to Roland.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Roland Chaisson. I live on the Tantamar Marsh. I'm also a board member of EOS. Yes, and we have 18 panels, and we installed ours before Barb did. I don't know what time with Eric put his on, but we did ours in 2016. I work for a co-op. I'm a wildlife biologist and environmental educator. So I'm going to send the ball over to Eric.
And good afternoon. It's now 4 minutes after the hour, Roland. Anyway, my name's Eric Tusz-King, and my wife and I, Margaret Tusz-King, we built a solar home in 2007. We finished it, and we didn't have solar panels on for a long time, and I'll show you pictures of that in a minute. I'm a cooperative developer. I was one of the founders of EOS way back. I don't know how many years ago that, and we're into the anniversary periods, so I don't know what year it was. But I'm also a community development worker, and one of the companies that I did found was Evergreen Builders Cooperative, and we built passive solar homes. So I'll be using that term very often in the conversation, not just solar panels.
Yeah, and I would also love to invite folks in the chat. Sometimes when I facilitate, I get people to do this, which is a jargon hook, because often when we're talking about solar or things with NGOs, also known as non-government organizations, or with cash incentives or other things like that, we end up speaking in acronyms or certain jargon that is actually not accessible. So feel free to be like, what is that? Because you will not be the only one with that question, no doubt. And I guess I kind of want to start by asking sort of if the panelists could tell us about their home, like how old it is, where your journey to solar started, and sort of how long ago and how long you have been using solar. Because there are dynamic homes here in New Brunswick, and a lot of folks have really much older homes and are wondering, should I do solar first? What should I do first? So should we start with Roland? Does that sound good?
Sure. Well, for us, when we moved here in Sackville, probably it's counting the years. I think it's been 14 years now. And my partner and I, Sabine, we're always interested in environmental issues and renewables, and we were involved in the early days of EOS. And the second year after we moved here, we bought an old farmhouse, which was similar to the one that we had up north, because we wanted to do some passive, not passive, some hobby farming. And so there was lots of talk at that time about solar panels, and we thought this would be great to do for us as well. But one of the things we discovered is that the first year moving in, our house was frigid cold. It was full of holes everywhere. And I guess one of the first things that we learned, that we wanted to go do the sexy thing and get solar panels on our house, but we found out that we had to plug our holes because it would really not make the panels very efficient. So we went through a long process of retrofitting this old house, which is about 160 years old plus. And that it was all skin deep, which was sort of not very satisfying because there were a lot of holes in the house. So that was basically our journey. We finally finished all the retrofitting, and in 2016 we got our solar panels installed in the yard, not on the roof. I can probably talk about that a little bit later on, why it wasn't on the roof and in the yard. Did I miss anything in there, Julia?
No, I think you did a great job. And I'm
Okay.
glad I'm at home today, so you can see this is an 1850s home as well. And of a traditional New Brunswick style that was chopped off of another house and rolled down the hill on telegraph poles long ago in the 1950s. So often when we're talking to solar installers, they'll be like, you might need many fewer panels if you plug a bunch of your holes. It's important. And I might go to Barb next, because I know Eric has a bit of a newer build home.
Right. Yeah. So mine is not 150 or 60 years old. It's about 60 years old. I think. Oh, don't know exactly, but it's more like a 60-year-old house. And it's like a smallish, there's 4 of us that live there with some a little bit of extra room in the basement kind of thing. So it's not a large house, but let's see. Oh yeah. So basically I was really keen on supporting the electrification of the grid, and when our oil tank needed replacing. This was what really spurred me to make the conversion, was because either we were going to have to replace our oil tank, or we're going to have to make the switch. So, and we had this weird heating system where we had a wood oil furnace, which is really quite, I don't know, strange. And so we had the barrier that then you have radiators instead of forced air. So I couldn't get a central heat pump. Anyway, so there was a long journey of figuring out what should we get, what's the best thing to do. And it actually took me quite a while to consult with a bunch of different people to figure out what should I do to electrify. So switched to a boiler, so an electric boiler. So we still have radiators because we didn't want to do the very disruptive work to switch over to forced air, like to switch from radiators to forced air. So we got an electric boiler. So now we have an electric heat system, and then after that, that's when we got solar, and it was July in 2021 that we had them installed. So yeah. And before that, we also have an electric or a solar hot water heater too. And we got that when we first moved into the house like 20 years ago. So we've had that a long time. So yeah, and it's been great. I mean, but in terms of money and whether we save, like the money factor one thing to keep in mind for me is that because we switched from oil heating and paying for filling an oil tank over to electric, our electric bill went way up because that was now our sole source of heat. Well, we have a fireplace too, but so not our sole source of heat. But basically, the numbers are kind of skewed on how much it's sort of cost and the cost benefit analysis because of this switch. Yeah. To electric heating. So yeah. So that's my story.
Thank you. And go ahead, Eric. Tell us about
Okay.
yours.
I'm going to share a picture. Tell me when it's up. Is it up now? There it is now. Okay. So the picture on the left is the house that we built in 2006, finished in 2007. And I use the term passive solar. Passive solar means that you're not generally using any significant technology to heat your home. When the home has been assessed scientifically by the former energy efficiency staff person, Joe Waugh, it came in at 51% of our space heating was done by the sun. What that means is that it's built well for energy, for retaining the heat inside the home. So it's well insulated, 6-inch walls with insulation on the outside. So it's about an R35, I think, on the outside, with the ceilings at about R60. The other thing that it means with passive solar is that it's sited properly. So you can see the sun shining on the south side of the house on the left. And that means the sun comes directly into the house. Now you see at this time of the year when that picture was taken, you can see that there's a long penetration of the sun into the house. That's exactly what you want in the winter. It's not what you want in the summer. So in the summer, the sun's high in the sky and doesn't penetrate the house. So we don't have excessive heat in the summer either. So with a new build, definitely go passive solar. And then you can go to your solar panels if needed. In 2016, the house on the picture on the right shows the solar panels now installed. And that we did the same, participated in the same program that Roland did at that time. And that was an EOS project that we did a bulk purchase of that. And we have 16 panels there. Prior to that, I should say on the left-hand picture, you'll see a small shed here off to the, that has 2 solar panels on that are hot water heating. So prior to that, we already had reduced our hot water heating for our home significantly. About 1/3 of the cost of a house, energy heating, is for your hot water. So we pretty well limited that. So that's what our house looks like, and that's explains some of the terms. I would suggest, Julia, I don't know if people are comfortable asking questions as we go along. But I'm willing to answer questions because I really appreciate that sometimes we use technology and terminology that's not comfortable. So to get it clarified at the beginning is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Indeed. Yeah. And same with the jargon hook, if there are certain things. Yep. I know that some people have already said, wow, beautiful windows, Eric. Just to make sure, keep the chat alive. And I'm very curious, and I'm very glad that you mentioned hot water heating. I feel like people often, we use the lens sort of the energy efficiency triangle, where you start with like assessment and understanding, and then efficiency, and then move up to renewables, because it gets more complex and more expensive as you go up the triangle. And I think a lot of people don't understand how much hot water is their energy use. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, you briefly started to mention, Roland, why you ended up with solar panels not roof mounted. And I'd sort of be curious what everyone's experience of the process of installing was like, and different challenges with different homes. Yeah, and what sort of setup you ended up with.
Well, initially we thought it'd be neat to put them on the roof. Because it's sort of out of the way, and it wouldn't have it on the ground. But this is where I think the site assessment comes in, is very important. If we were to put it on the roof, because we were angled the right way somewhat, so something would have had to be built on the roof to angle it to the right directions towards the sun. But we would have had to do a major clear cut in our front yard, which we really didn't want to do. But we had an open field. So putting it in the open field it does sort of have some advantages because if you're really counting how much energy you get from your solar panels, if you get it covered with snow, and people might be thinking about like today, if you get freezing rain, you might as well leave it on. Do not try to scrape it off with a scraper or anything like that, because you can damage your panels. But if you have light snow on it, the panels do generate their own heat. So if you're really counting how much energy you get from those when it snows, you can go outside. I can't reach up the top. We have 18 panels. So just even removing some of the soft snow on the bottom will help generate the melt. And it's fun to watch. There's a monitor outside on a post. And as you're wiping the snow off, you watch the energy go up. That's kind of a neat thing to do. It feels good. And so that there's a little bit of advantage there. If you had put it on the roof, it would take longer, but it does melt even with freezing rain. The sun will actually melt it. Yeah. I was supposed to say something else. Was there something else you asked there?
Nope,
I
that's
forget.
great, I think. Yeah,
Okay.
and we hear a lot of people being like, oh, do I have to cut down my 100-year-old oak in order to get solar panels? So it's good to, I feel like people aren't as familiar with ground mounts, so that's really valuable.
Well, I know
yeah.
some people who saw that we had solar panels, and I recommend doing the site assessment, and they found out that they couldn't do it, just the way their property is shaped and all that. And sometimes you can get the site assessment done for free rather than someone just installs it and puts it on your roof and you don't really know what's going on. So that is really crucial.
Yeah. The ground mount is a slightly more expensive because you have to install the framework, where if your house is already there, you can just put it over your roof. But there's drawbacks to that roof. The picture, our solar panels are 2 stories high. I don't get up there and clean them off.
We don't
Indeed.
clean
And
ours
actually,
off either.
No.
yeah, and it tends to be really not recommended, but also I'll put it in the chat, but in Alberta there was a study on how well photovoltaics do in Canadian winters and whether or not it makes sense to cover them or not cover them. And it turns out that sun still penetrates, and usually coverage is actually it's because where we are in Atlantic Canada, most people only make 10% of their solar energy between December and February, I believe, anyway. But also you still tend to get some through the snow as well. So plus the injury rate is really high, not just hurting your solar panel, but yeah, people do hurt themselves climbing their roofs as well.
I see Brittany's asked a question, but I don't quite understand her question. I wonder if she could actually verbalize it.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm just wondering, after the first year, after the solar panel installation on each of your homes, were there any experiences that stuck out for you? Any surprises, good or bad, or benefits that you expected and you're like, oh, that's great, or maybe something that went wrong and you're like, oh, I don't know. Just, yeah.
We were pleasantly pleased that we sized our solar panels correctly. What I mean by that is we generally went to net zero. That means we didn't produce much more than what we consumed. So that was a pleasure. So and it's hard to do that sizing exactly, but we were pretty well right on in that first year.
In our case, we were constantly watching it, seeing what we're doing and how much less electricity we're paying. That was a lot of fun. But because the house is so big and we're far from net zero, though we have, in terms of insulation value and through Energreen working on this house, it's one of the best insulated houses you can get for this old house, which is quite amazing. But still, to heat the house, we install the heat pump, and the heat pump struggles sometimes to keep the house warm. So we have fire as a backup. But that, because the heat pump really drains a lot, and it can't supply the energy it needs from the solar panels, which was we were really hoping to almost go like completely off grid initially with the 18 panels, but the heat pump really takes a dent in it. So I guess that was one surprise that we had. But it was really fun getting the NB power bills and seeing how they were going down. That was really nice. And feeling on the same time that you're doing something really good, that you're spewing out less CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah, I'll echo that feeling that it's been really neat, feeling like you're part of this big transition that we need to make, even if it's just a small part. And yeah, and we've enjoyed, like, you can get an app where you can follow how much, like, which of your panels are working and how much energy are they generating and this kind of thing. So it's really neat to see. And I actually found it really interesting that now I'm much more aware of the sun and where the sun is and where what the seasons are, and how from, you know, May to, like, so we've only had one full year, but like in that year we could see that from May to basically August, September, we generate a whole lot of energy, and then we're not on our NB power bill is almost zero. And then, you know, and then when the season changes and then we're not turned towards the sun, and it's different. And just as a note on the trees too, like, we actually don't have an ideal orientation or roof pitch, and we still got the panels, and we have 2 large trees in our backyard that shade the panels for part of the year, but we never even we would never cut those trees down, and we got them anyway. And you know, so it's not perfect, it's not ideal, but our solar installer he was like, no, it's still worth doing. And so I wouldn't say having trees precludes having solar. So.
And I'd like to hear more about your setup, Barb, but also there's a question from Molly. Does anyone have experience with microinverters, or are you all using string inverters? So
I think the answer to that question is that all Roland, Sabine, and ours are microinverter, or all string inverters, and Barb's is a microinverters because it's newer. Barb, can you see each panel being how much energy is produced?
Yes.
Yeah. And Roland, you and I are we just see the total.
Mm-hmm.
That's just because it's an older system. They weren't using microconverters when we started.
I'm gonna let Molly ask another question too, if that's all right.
Sure. Yeah, I'm curious, Barb, because we have a house. It's completely oriented the wrong way. We have 0 windows on the south side of our house. We have huge windows on the north side of our house facing our neighbor's driveway. There's a huge empty field on the south side of our house that it recently changed hands, and it was our neighbor's field, and we tried to buy that thinking that we could have a ground mounted system there, because we have also 3 large red maple trees on the south side of our house that shade. It's pretty flat pitch little bungalow.
Is
so
there an antithetical word to passive solar?
We have the opposite of that. But yeah, we did some. Our attic is R60, and we've done some air sealing, and we installed a heat pump when we first moved in. It was all baseboards, and that, you know, reduced our bill by quite a bit. And we got a quote from Fundy Solar 2 years ago, I want to say, because our roof pitch is east-west almost perfectly, and so they were suggesting with that multi-pitch roof and some shading from the trees that microinverters would be the way to go, because you're harvesting the energy from each panel separately. That's the way you can maximize your production. But it's more expensive. It's $1,000 per inverter, and we would, you know, have quite a few panels. So I'm curious to hear more about your situation, Barb. What aspect which direction does your roof face? And you have multi pitches, it sounds like. So
well, it does face south, sort of southeast.
Okay.
Yeah, and so it does have that advantage. So it's kind of facing the right direction. So in this, you know, in the summer they generate quite a lot of power. So that's why, I mean, because we don't, so I mean, if we want to talk money, and I'm terrible at money, but I did just get a rough idea in my head of how much it costs if people want to know. Like, it cost us about $15,000, I think, overall to do this project. And because we don't have that money sitting around, that's why we got the loan through the Beausejour Renewable Energy Co-op. So that was very helpful. I don't know what else. Our solar, just in terms of like the pitch thing, we have a very flat roof. So for the solar hot water heater, actually, it was Fundy Solar did ours as well. They actually lifted the solar panel, so it's elevated. And I don't know what, to be honest, I can't remember why he decided he didn't need to do it for the panels for the heating. So I don't know. Eric might
So,
have.
yeah, PV panels are a little bit more forgiving about the inclination.
Oh, okay.
So but hot water panels need more direct light. So.
Okay. So that's why.
Hopefully that answered some of your question there, Molly. We also have another question in the chat about, are there any drawbacks to consider ahead of the installation? So I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that, Sophie, but yeah, were there any sort of surprises or snags or things that people should consider? Because I feel like occasionally when people start getting into wanting to install solar, they assume everything will be peachy. Yeah. And there's a lot of science, there's a lot of consideration of your site, and also the condition of your roof and many other points that people don't get to consider. So any drawbacks or anything that comes to mind for y'all?
Yeah, I can answer that question based on experience of other houses, not so much ours. One is that you do need to know your condition of your roof, because you want your solar panels to be there for a long time. So you need to repair your roof before, if you've got any issues with that first. And so that's a part of the cost of the project. The other thing is that you need, if it's an older home, you've got to be careful of how much capacity you have on your panel, your breakers and your service panel, not your solar panels. One house that we, Beausejour Renewable Energy, provided a loan for, had to have a significant work done on their electrical system before they could install the solar panels. So you've got to do all that figuring first before you can say, okay, yeah, we can go with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd also like to know, I think most manufacturers now give a warranty for 80% at least efficiency for 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
So, and we still haven't seen the lifetime value of many of the first installs. So yeah, so if your roof condition is of serious consideration, but happily, many asphalt shingled roofs, most of the reason they break down is because of weather and UV damage. So solar panels can actually quite protect your roof as well. But it has to be sturdy enough to keep it on for at least 25 years.
Right.
And I'm a bit, a lot of people ask questions about the price. I know you mentioned a little bit, Barb, but as far as the price and the specs of each of your setups, I would love to know if you're willing to share. But not only that, if you pursued financing, because a lot of people in New Brunswick especially, they usually don't see a return on investment for they say on average it's 8 to 16 years. Many people around here say it's 7 or 8. So just wondering what the cost was and if you got to access any grants or incentives, or it's apparently many of you were involved in our bulk buy or BRE program. So yeah, let us know how you financed it.
Well, unfortunately, we weren't eligible for any when we did ours, because when we built our home, we accessed the funding that was available at that time. So we had to handle it ourselves. But what we took into calculations for the long term was that we also were going to plan to purchase, and then did purchase, an electric vehicle. So now we're calculating in the cost of the difference between gasoline and electricity. So we needed to calculate that into it. I guess the piece that with finances, and Barb says, she's not a finance person. The financing is complicated in all these situations because it's not a straightforward, this investment, this payback. There's so many pieces to it. Both Roland and Barb both had to do some energy savings, energy efficiencies, more insulation and things like that first. Those all have to be done first. As you said, Julia, that pyramid is really true. Do not bother putting a solar panel on if you can't get your energy to stay in your building. So that's that's just a foregone. You just have to do it that way.
Can I say something about that actually? If so we did our energy audit, and so this is like we went against that, and it was ultimately was for financial reasons and ideological reasons, I guess. So we did the energy audit, and we had because of previous repairs that needed to be done, we had done some recent insulation on our roof already. Then we had the energy audit done, and it's basically what it wanted us to do. And I did spend a lot of time getting quotes on all of this. The insulation that needed to be done either in the basement or on the walls, or replacing all our windows, was going to be so expensive. Like any one of those things was so expensive and so disruptive that we decided to get solar panels, even though we should have done the insulation, those kinds of insulation jobs first. So I'm actually curious, like what Eric thinks of that. I mean, we did do the main thing that the energy audit said was like, you need to get rid of your oil here.
That's right.
So we did that.
It's a really good question, Barb, because one of the things that we discovered even in building a new home is that there's no pure way to do these things. It's complicated. And as some of you may have seen the articles that are on EOS site called Solar Chronicles that Margaret wrote about how you build a solar home, and you can't always do exactly what you want to do. It's just not possible. And then you have to make the decisions, sometimes financial, sometimes ideological, your environmental commitments and things like that. Those all come into play. One of the things that we dealt with was we wanted to have a stable energy bill because we were moving into retirement, and we did not want to go up in price for the gasoline or other things. So we said, well, we know that if we purchase the solar panels, we know pretty well what we're going to be charged for, what our electrical charges are going to be for the rest of our time in that house. And that's really comforting when you're trying to plan a budget on a fixed income, or at least a set income that's not going to increase very much over the years. So that was very important for us.
I could probably add a little bit there. Our costs for the panels were similar to Barb. We actually used our savings to do it. With regard to the installation stuff, we did that over a long period of time. And I almost think that, yeah, you could do it the other way around. But, maybe over time, Barb, you might do gradually increase those panels over time. Especially, I mean, you took advantage of a loan that was available at that time too, as well. That helps you out. So sure. Yeah. And I guess, well, we're going to probably talk about that a little more, but how you're using the energy. Are you storing it, or are you connected to the grid, or also decisions you have to make? And maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later, because there's some complexities in that. But I also want to just add one more thing. Someone talked about some of the surprises. I think it was Brittany. And one of the I guess the negative ones, I can remember a couple of years, about a year or two after we had the panels up, we had a freezing rainstorm. The power was knocked out in Sackville. And the next day it was sunny and the panels were clear. And we had not a drop of energy coming into our house because we're fed into the grid. And at that point, we were like, damn, why do we have these solar panels? So, and I know this is later on, I'll maybe comment, but later on, what we're thinking of doing in the future, try to contravene that to a certain extent, as best as we can.
Mm. Yeah, and I think that's a really good segue to a lot of people don't know that when most of the houses that are solar panels in New Brunswick are net metered in with NB Power. So that means you don't have to have any on-site storage, and you're actually in an agreement with NB Power for them to store for you. But what that means is when the power is out, because there will be technicians on the line, they cannot have the lines electrified. So your power also turns off, which seems very counterintuitive to many. So many people put in a backup system, but when you're looking at quotes and trying to pay for solar panels, generally from talking to many solar installers, it usually ends up being about double the price of a net if you have a dual system. And yeah, that is quite a surprise to a lot of folks. But it is a great service that you don't have to have a huge amount of battery storage on site. Yeah, it's important to know.
So maybe Julie should add to that. Well, look, I'm terrible at understanding physics, like with Barb, with math, physics, I really don't. But I know that for connecting to the grid, the electric grid, we have to have a special inverter because we're going from DC, like we have our batteries, and has to be connected to AC for the house current and go through the grid.
Direct current and alternating current.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So there's an inverter there. So when we asked about, well, we thought maybe we'll have a couple batteries just for, but you need to buy another inverter. That's where you go in and those inverters are very costly.
Very expensive.
And then you have to look at the batteries. There's all kinds, and it's complicated. And the lead batteries, you can't let them run dry. They're toxic. There are salt batteries out, but they're much more expensive. And you can let those, from my understanding, you can let those drain without, damaging them. The lead batteries have to be kept warm. So there's a lot of complications to that. Anyway, I just want to add that in.
And that's why we didn't go that way. It was way more expensive, and we also wanted to, the grid needs to change, right?
That's
Like
right.
that was also
That's right.
part of it.
Yeah, and that was part of our thinking as well. We don't have a battery backup. We do fortunately have a wood stove that can heat our home, so we're not going to suffer too bad with a power outage. On the occasions since we have installed them, we've had 2 or 3 times when we've actually used a small gasoline powered generator, because we have freezers and things like that we needed to be conscious about. What we do in that, though, and we've carefully thought about these things, is that we use it for a couple of hours and then we take it to a neighbor or a friend or a family member, and they use it for a couple of hours. And so you use it as efficiently as possible. And to do that, we couldn't justify the use of or to purchase, not just financially, but actually for the sake of all that goes into creating a battery, for those few occasions when we need it. So we said, this is again one of those compromise things. We'll use a gasoline powered generator to get by those emergency times, rather than losing a freezer full of food. This is when we use the gas powered generator. We still have, we all live with those contradictions, and you just have to, work them through as best as possible.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say, Molly also noted that there's a cap on the size of system you could have when you're net metered as well. And I had posted in the chat the energy efficiency conservation pyramid. It's pretty ubiquitous, but I think it was started by the Minnesota Power folks. And in New Brunswick, most of the gateways for the incentives and programs we have are actually, like, you have to start with an energy audit of your home. So whether or not it makes sense for your construction style, or especially with some more traditional homes or people's cash flow, some of the recommendations might not make sense, but it's still a really good place to start. And I think they're only $99 to start through NB Power. But if you're applying to the Canadian Greener Homes Grant, I believe it ends up being an extra $200 on top of that. But they're really good places to start for understanding sort of what your home looks like, and also what your energy needs are when you're considering solar panels. So that kind of brings me into whether or not, does it feel like a good financial decision for each of you, or was it on principle, or both? And I guess Barb,
Both.
since yours was you're only a year in, but yeah, so it might be hard to tell thus far, but I can tell you feel good about it.
Definitely. Every time I see an oil truck go by, I'm like, yes. Not to make anybody feel bad if you're still in that position. But yeah, no, that it feels good. And when, when oil prices were skyrocketing, it was a relief not to be vulnerable to that. But yeah, I'm not sure. I would have think in maybe, yeah, it probably makes sense in several years it's going to pay for itself, I think. But I feel really good about not having an oil furnace anymore. Yeah.
And there are, as I post in the chat, there are incentives in Canada to help people move away from home furnaces that are powered by oil.
Yeah, and
which is exciting.
Yeah, yes, I saw that, and we did, we did the energy audit, and then we did apply for rebates, and so we got about, I think it was we got at least 5,000 back with the rebate. And just to comment on that, we did have one of the snags was that it was not, we weren't getting the rebate back. We thought we had applied for it and everything was fine. And it didn't happen. And then we kept checking with the guy that had done the energy audit, like, why aren't we getting this rebate? And it turned out that their company hadn't submitted the paperwork to the feds. And so that was a real pain, I have to say. Like, figuring out why it was, because we just thought, oh, it's done. We're just waiting for it. And then it was just taking months and months. And then a friend had done some work and they got their rebate back very quickly. And we were like, well, why is ours taking so long? Anyway, so it took a while to figure out where the problem was. So, bureaucracies. So that was a problem. But then we did get it eventually. So.
And Roland, did you get any incentives or rebates?
No, but we did it for both, for the feel good, and also eventually seeing that there'd be a payback on it. And similar to what Eric was talking about, we're sort of thinking long term with our house to try to reduce the amount of bills that we have, so that we're seeing in a future time that when the panels are paid off, that revenue is going to be coming back to us. So yeah, that was part of our decision process.
Yeah, we did some similar. We did a lot of the monthly monitoring, and I was going to share a screen just to show what the bill looks like. This is 2016, because it's quite unusual. Where am I at here? I think this is it. Yeah, there it goes. So they send you 1 month at a time. So if I just click on this there, that's the information that you would get. So this was for the month of February, and that's our reading. This is the number of kilowatts. That's our reading. How many? There it is. There's better. There's all these. That's the customer reading. There's what we supplied. What the difference between this 490 what the MB power supplied plus what we've had, so we pay the difference, and then they tell you how much your HST is. One of the real frustrations of MB power is that they when you purchase power from them, you pay the HST. When they purchase power from you, they don't pay HST, so you end up always paying HST, even though they may actually owe you money for that month, because sometimes during the month you need to purchase some power. So I generally keep these records over and over, and they send you this information cumulatively over the time. So you can do a calculation. So see You can see, let me see, June, there's a negative number. So we produce more than what we consumed in June. We presume, and same as July, same as August, same, then it's all the way down. So right there. So you can see what it does. And then what Barb said, there's one 713 kilowatts we had to purchase in January. And we only produced 91. That just shows you a market difference between that and back up into July. So, but you can do all sorts of, calculations on cost based
Do you
upon the
know
information they
when
provide.
yours will pay for itself?
We figured 8 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Roland, do you happen to know?
Yeah, about the same. One thing I'd follow up with Eric said, because of that tax stuff, it sort of made us upset. Our strategy was to say, okay, well, the more we sell, the more we get taxed. So we try to use as much as our energy as possible.
Right.
So when the sun is shining, we're doing the wash, we're vacuuming. We also have an electric vehicle, so we, as much
Plug
as
it
we
in.
can, we plug it in when the sun's shining. So we're using as much as possible. So there's less tax that's applied to it, less that we sell back.
Yeah, it's just another illustration of what Barbara was saying. You become very conscious of when the sun's out, and do things then, not in the middle of the night.
And they actually zoom out. If you do have any credit, they zero it out in April, I
Yeah.
believe. Yes.
Yeah, at the end of a year.
So you can't add it from, if you have X number at the end of April, it's not added to the next year.
No.
Which is kind of not nice.
Which is why we need systemic change.
Right.
Yes.
NB Power does not encourage us to do
No.
this.
No, NB Power finds us to be a frustration, and that's why they like nuclear and centralized production, because they only have to deal with themselves, and they don't have to deal with all us bothersome people. Yeah.
Tell us what you really think.
Mm.
And I mean, just for reference, so when you guys were talking about trying to plan for your cash flow into the future years, I mean, the cost of home furnace oil, I think, is 1.54 right now. We're having hearings about an 8.9% increase for NB Power rates right now. So it's really important to consider for sure. And I don't know, Eric, did you mention, did you have any incentives over loan products?
We did not.
Yeah.
We had exhausted ours when we built the house, and it was much lower at that time. It's one of the other things that's frustrating about the New Brunswick government is it's one of the poorest provinces for giving incentives to renewable energy or energy efficiency. You go across to any of the borders that we are adjacent to for Quebec, pre-EI and Nova Scotia, and they all have much better incentives for energy efficiency and renewable energy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and luckily, as probably some of you know, we just ran a solar bulk program, and we got quite a bit of pickup. But what's nice to hear about that is actually the feedback we got on how quickly people heard back from the Greener Homes grant was actually like they heard back within 40 days and they got paid out within 2 weeks. Yeah. So the timelines are quite good on that, and also that's up to like $40,000. So. And you compare that with the New Brunswick incentives, even if they might not be enough. And also a lot of credit unions actually have green, I think it's Prime Plus One, sort of green loans as well for switching to an EV or to a heat pump or getting solar panels. So even though there are some barriers and it's worthwhile like trying to figure out things for policy, there are definitely ways, and it's becoming more accessible, especially when you consider, I think it used to be $300 per watt in 1956 when the solar panels first became, or PVs became commercially available, and then and now they're incredibly more efficient. And yeah, and I think probably some of you have a good idea of what is a good per kilowatt cost for your setup. Do you know what I mean? I think is it $1 to $3 per watt is good for now.
I don't know mine. I don't know that calculation for me.
Okay. I'll make sure to put that in the chat after. But so I think for everybody's information, it'd be great to know what are your future plans for your homes, and also if any of you are doing hybrid systems or battery systems, any hopes that you have for your homes and your solar powered future.
Well, I can speak. I mean, aside from just saving up to try to do that expensive insulation that needs to be done, we're hoping to get an electric vehicle as our next vehicle. And this is a question actually. So I have heard that it is possible to, and maybe you need a large electric vehicle like a truck, but that people use their EVs to charge their homes when the power is out.
Yes.
Yes.
I was assuming you would need some kind of fancy converter or storage
No.
system or something like that, but maybe you guys can help explain.
Go ahead, Roland.
Yeah, well, the right now we have a Hyundai Kona, but Hyundai makes the Ioniq, and it has a two-way plugging system. So instead of going through remember I talked about all those inverters. This is, again, I don't know much about physics, but from what I understand is that you would be able to have your car plugged in, and then if the power goes out, you'd be able to take the power from your vehicle to keep your house running. And again, from what I heard, and again, I am not a physicist, you could potentially operate your house maybe for 2 days off a car battery.
Yeah.
I don't know what you've heard, Eric, but that's what
Yeah,
I've
it's
heard.
very similar. The other vehicle that does that is the F-150 Ford truck, and it's made for people who use the truck with electric power tools. So it's very convenient for them. They can just plug in their extension cord to their truck and run off their their drills or whatever. You could then use that for your home. No problem with that. There's not a lot of vehicles that do that. I'm aware of the truck and the Hyundai Kona. Is it Kona?
No, it's the Ioniq that does it.
Ioniq.
The Kona doesn't.
Yeah, that's right.
And which are out there now in their third version.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So
Yeah.
from what I understand, you could plug it in just like you do with the truck, but it's not a
Yeah.
truck in this case. It's smaller. It's like
Yes.
mini SUV.
Yeah. So it's one of those things that technology is there, but it's not available to the consumer readily yet. That's the challenge. And
we have also inquired about a two-way plug, even with our regular EV. Would there be a way to make a connection between the house? Because we don't have that with our electric vehicle. That doesn't exist. But we've talked to an electrician. He's looking into it. He doesn't know, but I think it's possible. So you wouldn't necessarily have to get by the Ioniq. Maybe there would be a way to devise your plugging system from your EV to the house that you could run the energy off from the car.
Awesome. On Monday, we had a whole EV charger session with NB Power and JP Willett. And that was definitely something that they were mentioning, like it can be a really good emergency system. And also compared to other provinces, that the electrical entrance tends to be 200 amps for New Brunswick homes, which is not the same for many places. So we're much more ready for EV charging vehicles at home than many other provinces, which is good to know.
Yeah, I guess that's just mentioning JP. Our experience with dealing with the people at NB Power, they're fine, and JP is very good to work with.
Agree.
It's NB Power as a company, as a structure, and the New Brunswick government's policies that are aggravating. That's where our frustration comes in.
And I think on the call, what he said was that the regulator of NB Power will not allow them to invest any ratepayer money into sort of renewable infrastructure the way that it is. So they're not, it's a hard one. Oh, you're muted there, Barb.
Who is the regulator of NB Power?
I can't remember the acronym, but I will find it for you.
Okay.
It's a provincially appointed body that regulates NB Power.
I think it might be the, well, in Nova Scotia, it's the Utility and Review Board that regulates
okay.
utilities, electric
Consumer.
utilities. And I know that because Mahone Bay has an electric utility. So I'm wondering if it's like the New Brunswick Utility and Review
I think
Board.
it's NBEUB. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
okay.
And if you follow the news, they're in the news for the for 2 weeks during those rate hearings right now.
Right. I'm just curious why the regulator wouldn't be supportive of
Yeah.
renewables.
I think
Well,
it
you
has
have to
to
look-
do with the how currently energy poor New Brunswickers are considered. So that means that the proportion of our costs that compared to our net income is really, really high, which is generally true for most of Atlantic Canada. So there's quite a bit of public pushback on how expensive our energy is and how expensive
Right.
our energy costs are. And hopefully with a more hybridized system, it could actually go down, but it's complicated policy stuff.
It's also the composition of who's on that board. I don't know how they're nominated, but they're people that are not necessarily very friendly towards renewables.
Indeed. So I guess, is there anything people would like to say about hybrid or backup systems? Just because I know all of you are net metered, but I think you know quite a bit about those systems in case people
Well,
are interested.
We have a small cottage in Nova Scotia that has a small solar panel, 6 panels, because we just use it for 3-season use. And one of the things that we've learned out of that was that originally we went with lead acid based batteries. And during the COVID period, when we could not access our cottage for several months during the winter, they ruined. And we had to replace all of our lead acid. And so we went with lithium batteries, much more expensive because we just couldn't maintain them. So you've got to think through all the pieces. Lead acid batteries are fine for most. We have another person who lives near our cottage who is off grid and uses lead acid, and he has no problem with them at all. But you've got to think about everything. We're so used to just buying something off the shelf, installing it, and making it work, that it's not quite that easy with all the pieces. But it's not, it should not stop anybody. It's just you have to educate yourself with new information and look at the world differently. And that's all. I would still strongly encourage people to install solar panels. It's a no-brainer for most people if they have the site. The money is an issue, but with the grants and the loan programs, things like that, that should not be a significant barrier for many more people than currently use it. You just build it into your regular loans, your mortgage, whatever, and it's paid off in 15 years. That's good. And it's not a huge thing. $1,000. If you say it's a $15,000 installation over 15 years, it's $1,000 a year. Well, no, that shouldn't. Most budgets could probably handle that.
It's worth all that for the good feeling.
Yeah.
And I would add to both of those statements that now I am wishing we have 20 panels. We could have had 27. And I was just like, oh, but the cost went up that much that in my head, it was like, oh no, that's too much. I don't want to spend that much. But now it's like, oh, why didn't we just get as many panels as we could? Right. So, I would say that to someone too. It's just like, get as many as you can. I don't know.
Amazing. Well, it's almost time for us to go, but I was just curious if you guys have anything else to say other than to share that feeling and spread that good feeling of when you see the oil truck go by. Are there any sort of closing thoughts or statements any of you have before we go?
I just wanted to make sure people had a chance to ask questions that were here.
Yeah. Luckily, people have been asking questions along the way.
Yeah.
The other thing I would suggest is don't hesitate to reach out to people who know. And I would say not necessarily your installer, because the installers have a bias to install panels, and that's their business. But there's a lot of other groups that are nonprofits like EOS, and a variety of them around the Maritimes, who you can go to and get good advice. So don't hesitate to use those.
Yeah, I would recommend reaching out to EOS for your questions, and if EOS doesn't know the answers, they know where to find them. And there's also Julia hasn't said too much about Renewables NB, but there's quite a whack of information on the Renewables NB website on stories on people having done various types of installations of various forms of renewable technology.
Indeed, yeah. And I already posted in the chat before that Renewables NB link on the current incentives. But the whole reason this panel is happening is because people kept asking for the experience of homeowners and for folks who aren't trying to sell you solar panels to talk about what are the challenges and what does the process look like. So thank you so much for all of your insights. And thank you for the Renewables NB network for making sure that this happened. And huge thank you to everyone who came to join. It was a great turnout, and we'll be sure to publish this on YouTube if you want to share it later. And thank you so much for your time, Roland and Eric and Barb, and have a great day, everyone.
Good.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Aaron. Let
Thanks.
snow
the
storm.
sun shine. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.